Thursday, November 12th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Meep came to tell us that she'd been to see Mr. Dussel. He asked her the moment she entered the room if she knew of a hiding place and was enormously pleased when Meep said she had something in mind. She added that he had need to go into hiding as soon as possible, preferably Saturday, but he thought this was highly improbable, since he wanted to bring his records up to date, settle his accounts, and attend to a couple of patients. Meep relayed the message to us this morning. We didn't think it was wise to wait so long. All these preparations require explanations to various people who we feel ought to be kept in the dark. Meep went to ask if Mr. Dussel couldn't manage to come on Saturday after all, but he said no, and now he's scheduled to arrive on Monday. I think it's odd that he doesn't jump at our proposal. If they pick him up on the street, it won't help either his records or his patients. So why the delay? If you ask me, it is stupid of Father to humor him. Otherwise, no news. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, November 17th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. Dussel has arrived. Everything went smoothly. Meep told him to be at a certain place in front of the post office at 11 a.m., when a man would meet him, and he was at the appointed place at the appointed time. Mr. Kleiman went up to him, announced that the man he was expecting to meet was unable to come, and asked him to drop by the office to see Meep. Mr. Kleiman took a streetcar back to the office, while Mr. Dussel followed on foot. It was 11:30 when Mr. Dussel tapped on the office door. Meep asked him to remove his coat so the yellow star couldn't be seen, and brought him to the private office where Mr. Kleiman kept him occupied until the cleaning lady had gone. On the pretext that the private office was needed for something else, Meep took Mr. Dussel upstairs, opened the bookcase, and stepped inside, while Mr. Dussel looked on in amazement. In the meantime, the seven of us had seated ourselves around the dining table to await the latest addition to our family with coffee and cognac. Meep first led him into the Frank family's room. He immediately recognized our furniture, but had no idea we were upstairs, just above his head. When Meep told him, he was so astonished he nearly fainted. Thank goodness she didn't leave him in suspense any longer, but brought him upstairs. Mr. Dussel sank into a chair and stared at us, dumbstruck in silence, as though he thought he could read the truth on our faces. Then he stuttered, "Aber, but are you nicht in Belgium? The officer, the auto, they were not coming? Your escape was not working?" We explained the whole thing to him, about how we had deliberately spread the rumor of the officer and the car to throw the Germans and anyone else who might come looking for us off the track. Mr. Dussel was speechless in the face of such ingenuity, and could do nothing but gaze around in surprise as he explored the rest of our lovely and ultra-practical annex. We all had lunch together. Then he took a short nap, joined us for tea, put away the few belongings Meep had been able to bring here in advance, and began to feel much more at home, especially when we handed him the following typewritten rules and regulations for the secret annex. A Van Dan production. Prospectus and Guide to the Secret Annex, a unique facility for the temporary accommodation of Jews and other dispossessed persons. Open all year round, located in beautiful, quiet, wooded surroundings in the heart of Amsterdam, no private residences in the vicinity. Can be reached by streetcar, 13 or 17, and also by car and bicycle. For those to whom such transportation has been forbidden by the German authorities, it can also be reached on foot. Furnished and unfurnished rooms and apartments are available at all times, with or without meals. Price, free. Diet, low fat. Running water in the bathroom, no bath, and on various inside and outside walls. Cozy wood stoves for heating. Ample storage space for a variety of goods. 2 large, modern safes. Private radio with a direct line to London, New York, Tel Aviv, and many other stations. Available to all residents after 6 p.m. No listening to forbidden broadcasts with certain exceptions. For example, German stations may only be tuned in to listen to classical music. It is absolutely forbidden to listen to German news bulletins. regardless of where they are transmitted from, and to pass them on to others. Rest hours from 10 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., 10:15 a.m. on Sundays. Owing to circumstances, residents are required to observe rest hours during the daytime when instructed to do so by the management. To ensure the safety of all, rest hours must be strictly observed. Free time activities, none allowed outside the house until further notice. Use of language. It is necessary to speak softly at all times. Only the language of civilized people may be spoken, thus, no German. Reading and relaxation. No German books may be read, except for the classics and works of a scholarly nature. Other books are optional. Calisthenics, daily. Singing, only softly, and after 6 p.m. Movies, prior arrangements required. Classes, a weekly correspondence course in shorthand, courses in English, French, math, and history offered at any hour of the day or night, payment in the form of tutoring. Example given, Dutch. Separate department for the care of the small household pets, with the exception of vermin, for which special permits are required. Meal times. Breakfast at 9 a.m. daily, except holidays and Sundays, at approximately 11:30 a.m. on Sundays and holidays. Lunch, a light meal, from 1:15 p.m. to 1:45 p.m. Dinner may or may not be a hot meal. Mealtime depends on news broadcasts. Obligations, with respect to the Supply Corps. Residents must be prepared to help with office work at all times. Baths. The washtub is available to all residents after 9 a.m. on Sundays. Residents may bathe in the bathroom, kitchen, private office, or front office as they choose. Alcohol for medicinal purposes only. The end. Yours, Anne. Thursday, November 19th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, just as we thought, Mr. Dussel is a very nice man. Of course, he didn't mind sharing a room with me. To be honest, I'm not exactly delighted at having a stranger use my things, but you have to make sacrifices for a good cause, and I'm glad I can make this small one. If we could save even one of our friends, the rest doesn't matter, said Father, and he's absolutely right. The first day Mr. Dussel was here, he asked me all sorts of questions. For example, what time the cleaning lady comes to the office, how we've arranged to use the washroom, and when we're allowed to go to the toilet. You may laugh, but these things aren't so easy in a hiding place. During the daytime, we can't make any noise that might be heard downstairs. And when someone else is there, like the cleaning lady, we have to be extra careful. I patiently explained all this to Mr. Dussel, but I was surprised to see how slow he is to catch on. He asks everything twice and still can't remember what you have told him. Maybe he's just confused by the sudden change and he'll get over it. Otherwise, everything is going fine. Mr. Dussel has told us much about the outside world we have missed for so long. He had sad news. Countless friends and acquaintances have been taken off to a dreadful fate. Night after night, green and gray military vehicles cruise the streets. They knock on every door, asking whether any Jews live there. If so, the whole family is immediately taken away. If not, they proceed to the next house. It's impossible to escape their clutches unless you go into hiding. They often go around with lists, knocking only on those doors where they know there's a big haul to be made. They frequently offer a bounty, so much per head. It's like the slave hunts of the olden days. I don't mean to make light of this, and it's much too tragic for that. In the evenings when it's dark, I often see long lines of good, innocent people accompanied by crying children, walking on and on, ordered about by a handful of men who bully and beat them until they nearly drop. No one is spared. The sick, the elderly, children, babies, and pregnant women, all are marched to their death. We're so fortunate here, away from the turmoil. We wouldn't have to give a moment's thought to all the suffering if it weren't for the fact that we're so worried about those we hold dear, whom we can no longer help. I feel wicked, sleeping in a warm bed, while somewhere out there, my dearest friends are dropping from exhaustion or being knocked to the ground. I get frightened myself, when I think of close friends who are now at the mercy of the cruelest monsters ever to stalk the earth. And all because they're Jews. Yours, Anne. Friday, November 20th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, we don't really know how to react. Up to now, very little news about the Jews had reached us here, and we thought it was best to stay as cheerful as possible. Every now and then, Meep used to mention what had happened to a friend, and Mother or Mrs. Van Dan would start to cry. So she decided it was better not to say any more. But we bombarded Mr. Dussel with questions, and the stories he had to tell were so gruesome and dreadful that we can't get them out of our heads. Once we have had time to digest the news, we'll probably go back to our usual joking and teasing. It won't do us or those outside any good if we continue to be as gloomy as we are now. And what would be the point of turning the secret annex into a melancholy annex? No matter what I'm doing, I can't help thinking about those who are gone. I catch myself laughing and remember that it's a disgrace to be so cheerful. But am I supposed to spend the whole day crying? No, I can't do that. This gloom will pass. Added to this misery, there's another, but of a more personal nature, and it pales in comparison to the suffering I've just told you about. Still, I can't help telling you that lately I've begun to feel deserted. I'm surrounded by too great a void. I never used to give it much thought, since my mind was filled with my friends and having a good time. Now I think either about unhappy things or about myself. It's taken a while, but I finally realized that Father, no matter how kind he may be, can't take the place of my former world. When it comes to my feelings, Mother and Margot ceased to count long ago. But why do I bother you with this foolishness? I'm terribly ungrateful, Kitty. I know, but when I've been scolded for the umpteenth time and have these other woes to think about as well, my head begins to reel. Yours, Anne. Saturday, November 28th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, we've been using too much electricity and have now exceeded our ration. The result, excessive economy and the prospect of having the electricity cut off. No light for 14 days. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? But who knows? Maybe it won't be so long. It's too dark to read after 4 or 4:30. So we while away the time with all kinds of crazy activities. Telling riddles, doing calisthenics in the dark, speaking English or French, reviewing books. After a while, everything gets boring. Yesterday I discovered a new pastime, using a good pair of binoculars to peek into the lighted rooms of the neighbors. During the day, our curtains can't be opened, not even an inch, but there's no harm when it's so dark. I never knew that neighbors could be so interesting. Ours are, at any rate. I've come across a few at dinner, one family making home movies, and the dentist across the way working on a frightened old lady. Mr. Dussel, the man who said to get along so well with children and to absolutely adore them, has turned out to be an old-fashioned disciplinarian and preacher of unbearably long sermons on manners. Since I have the singular pleasure of sharing my far too narrow room with His Excellency, and since I'm generally considered to be the worst behaved of the three young people, it's all I could do to avoid having the same old scoldings and admonitions repeatedly flung at my head, and to pretend not to hear. This wouldn't be so bad if Mr. Dussel weren't such a tattletale, and hadn't singled out Mother to be the recipient of his reports. If Mr. Dussel's just read me the riot act, Mother lectures me all over again, this time throwing the whole book at me. And if I'm really lucky, Mrs. Van D calls me to account 5 minutes later and lays down the law as well. Really, it's not easy being the badly brought up center of attention of a family of nitpickers. In bed at night, as I ponder my many sins and exaggerated shortcomings, I get so confused by the sheer amount of things I have to consider that I either laugh or cry, depending on my mood. Then I fall asleep with the strange feeling of wanting to be different than I am or being different than I want to be, or perhaps of behaving differently than I am or want to be. Oh dear, now I'm confusing you too. Forgive me, but I don't like crossing things out. And in these times of scarcity, tossing away a piece of paper is clearly taboo. So I can only advise you not to reread the above passage and to make no attempt to get to the bottom of it, because you will never find your way out again. Yours, Anne. Monday, December 7th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Hanukkah and St. Nicholas Day nearly coincided this year. They were only one day apart. We didn't make much of a fuss with Hanukkah, merely exchanging a few small gifts and lighting the candles. Since candles are in short supply, we lit them for only 10 minutes. But as long as we sing the song, that doesn't matter. Mr. Van Daan made a menorah out of wood, so that was taken care of too. St. Nicholas Day on Saturday was much more fun. During dinner, Bep and Meep were so busy whispering to Father that our curiosity was aroused and we suspected they were up to something. Sure enough, at 8 o'clock, we all trooped downstairs through the hall in a pitch darkness. It gave me the shivers, and I wished I was safely back upstairs, to the alcove. We could switch on the light, since this room doesn't have any windows. When that was done, Father opened the big cabinet. "Oh, how wonderful!" we all cried. In the corner was a large basket decorated with colorful paper and a mask of Black Peter. We quickly took the basket upstairs with us. Inside was a little gift for everyone, including an appropriate verse. Since you're familiar with the kinds of poems people write each other on St. Nicholas Day, I won't copy them down for you. I received a Cupid doll, Father got bookends, and so on. Well, anyway, it was a nice idea. And since the 8 of us had never celebrated St. Nicholas Day before, this was a good time to begin. Yours, Anne. P.S. We also had presents for everyone downstairs, a few things left over from the good old days. Plus Meep and Bep are always grateful for money. Today we heard that Mr. Van Daan's ashtray, Mr. Dussel's picture frame, and Father's bookends were made by none other than Mr. Vascoul. How can anyone be so clever with his hands is a mystery to me. Thursday, December 10th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. Van Daan used to be in the meat, sausage, and spice business. He was hired for his knowledge of spices, and yet to our great delight, it's his sausage talents that have come in handy now. We ordered a large amount of meat, under the counter of course, that we were planning to preserve in case there were hard times ahead. Mr. Van Daan decided to make bratwurst, sausages, and metwurst. I had fun watching him put the meat through the grinder once, twice, 3 times. Then he added the remaining ingredients to the ground meat and used a long pipe to force the mixture into the casings. We ate the bratwurst with sauerkraut for lunch, but the sausages, which were going to be canned, had to dry first. So we hung them over a pole suspended from the ceiling. Everyone who came into the room burst into laughter when they saw the dangling sausages. It was such a comical sight. The kitchen was a shambles. Mr. Van Daan, clad in his wife's apron and looking fatter than ever, was working away at the meat. What with his bloody hands, red face, and spotted apron, he looked like a real butcher. Mrs. Van D was trying to do everything at once, learning Dutch out of a book, stirring the soup, watching the meat, sighing and moaning about her broken rib. That's what happens when old ladies do such stupid exercises to get rid of their fat behinds. Dussel had an eye infection and was sitting next to the stove, dabbing his eye with chamomile tea. Pim, seated in the one ray of sunshine coming through the window, kept having to move his chair this way and that to stay out of the way. His rheumatism must have been bothering him because he was slightly hunched over and was keeping an eye on Mr. Van Daan with an agonized expression on his face. He reminded me of one of those aged invalids you see in the poorhouse. Peter was romping around the room with Mooshie the cat, while Mother Margot and I were peeling boiled potatoes. When you get right down to it, none of us were doing our work properly because we were all so busy watching Mr. Van Daan. Dussel has opened his dental practice. Just for fun, I'll describe the session with his very first patient. Mother was ironing, and Mrs. Van D, the first victim, sat down on a chair in the middle of the room. Dussel, unpacking his case with an air of importance, asked for some eau de cologne, which could be used as a disinfectant, and Vaseline, which would have to do for wax. He looked in Mrs. Van D's mouth and found two teeth that made her wince with pain and utter incoherent cries every time he touched them. After a lengthy examination, lengthy as far as Mrs. Van D was concerned, since it actually took no longer than 2 minutes, Dussel began to scrape out a cavity, but Mrs. Van D had no intention of letting him. She flailed her arms and legs until Dussel finally let go of his probe, and it remained stuck in Mrs. Van D's tooth. That really did it. Mrs. Van D lashed out wildly in all directions, cried as much as you can with an instrument like that in your mouth, tried to remove it, but only managed to push it in even further. Mr. Dussel calmly observed the scene, his hands on his hips, while the rest of the audience roared with laughter. Of course, that was very mean of us. If it had been me, I'm sure I would have yelled even louder. After a great deal of squirming, kicking, screaming, and shouting, Mrs. Van D finally managed to yank the thing out, and Mr. Dussel went on with his work, as if nothing had happened. He was so quick that Mrs. Van D didn't have time to pull any more shenanigans. But then he had more help than he's ever had before, no fewer than 2 assistants. Mrs. Van D and I performed our job well. The whole scene resembled one of those engravings from the Middle Ages entitled A Quack at Work. In the meantime, however, the patient was getting restless, since she had to keep an eye on her soup and her food. One thing is certain, it'll be a while before Mrs. Van D makes another dental appointment. Yours, Anne. Sunday, December 13th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, I'm sitting here nice and cozy in the front office, peering out through a chink in the heavy curtains. It's dusky, but there's just enough light to right by. It's really strange watching people walk past. They all seem to be in such a hurry that they nearly trip over their own feet. Those on bicycles whiz by so fast I can't even tell who's on the bike. The people in this neighborhood aren't particularly attractive to look at. The children especially are so dirty that you wouldn't want to touch them unless with a 10-foot pole. Real slum kids with runny noses. I can hardly understand a word they say. Yesterday afternoon, when Margot and I were taking a bath, I said, what if we took a fishing rod and reeled in each of those kids one by one as they walked by, stuck them in the tub, washed and mended their clothes, and then tomorrow they'd be just as dirty and tattered as they were before, Margot replied. But I'm babbling. There are also other things to look at. Cars, boats, and the rain. I could hear the streetcar and the children, and I'm enjoying myself. Our thoughts are subject to as little change as we are. They're like a merry-go-round, turning from the Jews to food, from food to politics. By the way, speaking of Jews, I saw 2 yesterday when I was peeking through the curtains. I felt as though I were gazing at one of the 7 wonders of the world. It gave me such a funny feeling, as if I had denounced them to the authorities and was now spying on their misfortune. Across from us is a houseboat. The captain lives there with his wife and children. He has a small yapping dog. We know the little dog only by its bark and by its tail, which we could see whenever it runs around the deck. Oh, what a shame. It's just started raining and most of the people are hidden under their umbrellas. All I could see are raincoats, and now again, the back of a stocking-capped head. Actually, I don't even need to look. By now I could recognize the women at a glance, gone to fat from eating potatoes, dressed in a red or green coat and worn-out shoes, a shopping bag dangling from their arms, with faces that either grim or good-humored, depending on the mood of their husbands. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, December 22nd, 1942. Dearest Kitty, the Annex was delighted to hear that we'll all be receiving an extra quarter-pound of butter for Christmas. According to the newspaper, everyone is entitled to half a pound, but they mean those lucky souls who get their ration books from the government, not Jews in hiding like us who can only afford to buy 4 rather than 8 ration books on the black market. Each of us is going to bake something with the butter. This morning, I made 2 cakes and a batch of cookies. It's very busy upstairs, and Mother has informed me that I'm not to do any studying or reading until all the household chores have been finished. Mrs. Van Daan is lying in bed, nursing her bruised rib. She complains all day long, constantly demands that the bandages be changed, and is generally dissatisfied with everything. I'll be glad when she gets back on her feet and can clean up after herself because, I must admit, she's extraordinarily hardworking and neat, and as long as she's in good physical and mental condition, she's quite cheerful. As if I don't hear shh, shh enough during the day because I'm always making too much noise, my dear roommate has come up with the idea of saying shh, shh to me all night too. According to him, I shouldn't even turn over. I refuse to take any notice of him, and the next time he shushes me, I'm going to shush him right back. He gets more exasperating and egotistical as the days go by. Except for the first week, I haven't seen even one of the cookies he so generously promised me. He's particularly infuriating on Sundays when he switches on the light at the crack of dawn to exercise for 10 minutes. To me, the torment seems to last for hours, since the chairs I used to make my bed longer are constantly being jiggled under my sleepy head. After rounding off his limbering up exercises with a few vigorous arm swings, his lordship begins dressing. His underwear is hanging on a hook, so first he lumbers over to get it, and then lumbers back past my bed. But his tie is on the table, so once again he pushes and bumps his way past the chairs. But I mustn't waste any more of your time griping about disgusting old men. It won't help matters anyway. My plans for revenge, such as unscrewing the light bulb, locking the door, and hiding his clothes, have unfortunately had to be abandoned in the interests of peace. Oh, I'm becoming so sensible. We've got to be reasonable about everything we do here. Studying, listening, holding our tongues, helping others, being kind, making compromises, and I don't know what else. I'm afraid my common sense, which was in short supply to begin with, will be used up too quickly, and I won't have any left by the time the war is over. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, January 13th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, this morning I was constantly interrupted, and as a result, I haven't been able to finish a single thing I have begun. We have a new pastime, namely filling packages with powdered gravy. This gravy is one of the Gies and Company's products. Mr. Kugler hasn't been able to find anyone else to fill the packages, and besides, it's cheaper if we do the job. It's the kind of work they do in prisons. It's incredibly boring. It makes us dizzy and giggly. Terrible things are happening outside. At any time of night and day, poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. They're allowed to take only a knapsack and a little cash with them, and even then, they're robbed of these possessions on the way. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. Women return from shopping to find their houses sealed, their families gone. The Christians in Holland are also living in fear because their sons are being sent to Germany. Everyone is scared. Every night, hundreds of planes pass over Holland on their way to German cities to sow their bombs on German soil. Every hour, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people are being killed in Russia and Africa. No one can keep out of the conflict. The entire world is at war, and even though the Allies are doing better, the end is nowhere in sight. As for us, we're quite fortunate, luckier than millions of people. It's quiet and safe here, and we're using our money to buy food. We're so selfish that we talk about after the war and look forward to new clothes and shoes when actually we should be saving every penny to help others when the war is over, to salvage whatever we can. The children in this neighborhood run around in thin shirts and wooden shoes. They have no coats, no socks, no caps, and no one to help them. Gnawing on a carrot to still their hunger pangs, they walk from their cold houses through cold streets to an even colder classroom. Things have gotten so bad in Holland that hordes of children stop passerby in the streets to beg for a piece of bread. I could spend hours telling you about the suffering the war has brought, but I would only make myself more miserable. All we can do is wait, as calmly as possible, for it to end. Jews and Christians alike are waiting. The whole world is waiting, and many are waiting for death. Yours, Anne. Saturday, January 30th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, I'm seething with rage, yet I can't show it. I would like to scream, stamp my foot, give mother a good shaking, cry, and I don't know what else because of the nasty words, mocking looks, and accusations that she hurls at me day after day, piercing me like arrows from a tightly strung bow, which are nearly impossible to pull from my body. I would like to scream at mother, Margot, the Van Dans, Dussel, and father too. Leave me alone. Let me have at least one night when I don't cry myself to sleep with my eyes burning and my head pounding. Let me get away from everything, away from this world. But I can't do that. I can't let them see my doubts or the wounds they have inflicted on me. I couldn't bear their sympathy or their good-humored derision. It would only make me want to scream even more. Everyone thinks I'm showing off when I talk. Ridiculous when I'm silent, insolent when I answer, cunning when I have a good idea, lazy when I'm tired, selfish when I eat one bite more than I should, stupid, cowardly, calculating, etc., etc. All day long, I hear nothing but what an exasperating child I am. And although I laugh it off and pretend not to mind, I do mind. I wish I could ask God to give me another personality, one that doesn't antagonize everyone. But that's impossible. I'm stuck with the character I was born with, and yet I'm not sure I'm not a bad person. I do my best to please everyone, more than they would ever suspect in a million years. When I'm upstairs, I try to laugh it off because I don't want them to see my troubles. More than once, after a series of absurd reproaches, I have snapped at mother. I don't care what you say. Why don't you just wash your hands of me? I'm a hopeless case. Of course, she would tell me not to talk back and virtually ignore me for 2 days. Then suddenly, all would be forgotten, and she would treat me like everyone else. It's impossible for me to be all smiles one day and venomous the next. I'd rather choose the golden mean, which isn't so golden, and keep my thoughts to myself. Perhaps sometime I'll treat the others with the same contempt as they treat me. Oh, if only I could. Yours, Anne.